and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let members just introduce themselves, starting with that, right?
John Smith, Board of Finance.
Orlando Kelfi, Board of Finance.
Mike Lamoff, Board of Finance.
Mike Ferry, Board of Finance.
Ron Burns, Board of Finance.
Anthony D'Amato, City Council.
Jody Zilskagni, City Council. Cheryl Tebow, Board of Finance.
Dave Mills, City Council.
Dave Pileski, City Council.
Mary Fortier, City Council. Assistant Clerk Dawn LaBella.
I'm Mayor Kim Kaki. And number 1.
To receive information, including estimated costs and discussed work is necessary for design, permitting, renovation, code upgrade, construction, and inspection work associated with the relocation of City Hall to Memorial Boulevard School, repurposing a portion of the facility from an educational to a municipal command administrative use. Work includes renovations and new interior construction as needed for ADA and code compliance of new use, HVAC, mechanical, electrical repairs and upgrades, and exterior site work and parking expansion.
If you don't mind, Your Honor, I'd like to introduce.
Yes, go ahead.
So I have a rather lengthy remark to make, so if everyone can just bear with me. I've requested the opportunity to speak first at this special joint board meeting to make the members and the public aware of some recent developments. Even after going through the city charter and finding that I do not necessarily meet the benchmark for conflict of interest, nevertheless, I plan to recuse myself from all further deliberation and potential voting on the topic of any possible relocation of City Hall. I'm recusing myself even though the charter doesn't specifically require me to do so, because I do not wish to engage the public trial on whether I have a perceived conflict of interest or not. Why am I doing this? I am doing this because an entity that is owned in partnership between my father, Edward D'Amato Jr., and his business associate, Martin Kenny, from Lexington Partners, LLC, have submitted a proposal to the mayor and the Bristol Development Authority regarding the possible relocation of City Hall to 10 Main Street in downtown Bristol. With that being said, you will have the opportunity to review an additional proposal other than Memorial Boulevard School by an entity named 10 Main and South, LLC, on the 28th of this month. I am in no way affiliated with this entity, nor do I sit on its board of directors or have engaged or plan to engage in any business dealings with this entity. I also do not derive any financial gain from 10 Main and South, LLC, as I am not an employee of that entity. The mere fact that my last name is D'Amato is enough for the court of public opinion to cast a shadow of doubt upon me, and I plan on being receptive to those potential concerns rather than be disruptive to the entire process. It must be known that 10 Main Street proposal is not a competing proposal to the Memorial Boulevard City Hall relocation. Rather, another option and a more of a holistic strategy that takes into account more than just one city property rather than putting all of our eggs in one basket. Moving forward, be it known that I recognize that the possible relocation of City Hall to any designation other than 111 North Main Street puts me at a perceived conflict of interest. However, if the decision is made to keep City Hall at 111 North Main Street, I plan on having an uninhibited discussion and vote if the situation arises with other proposals eliminated prior to any discussion. Be it also known that I recognize that any discussion of the theater project at Memorial Boulevard School is not off limits to me and is not a conflict of interest, as the City Hall relocation and the theater are two separate projects. However, prior to me recusing myself from this meeting and all further meetings pertaining to the subject matter, I am within my right as an elected official from the 1st District to make some specific commentary regarding the City Hall project in general. I respectfully request that any potential voting on requests for funding or other items related to projects dealing with Memorial Boulevard School be separated so that I may be a part of the deliberation. For example, I recognize that the theater project is separate from any potential City Hall relocation, and I respectfully request the board and council maintain that separation going forward. I also respectfully request that the board and council maintain separation between renovations, projects, or funding requests for 111 North Main Street and any Memorial Boulevard School project or any other proposal. I also wish to inform the joint board of my opinions regarding the funding of Memorial Boulevard City Hall relocation project. I urge the joint board to listen to any and all proposals before making any decisions on the fate of Memorial Boulevard School or the current City Hall. I believe we are at a turning point in the city, and we have a real opportunity to change the way we do business going into the future. However, we also have the opportunity to inflict severe damage by making the wrong choice. The choice of how we move forward with City Hall is a crucial one because it has the ability to set many other things into motion. Many people are aware that I'm a fiscal conservative. It's no secret. However, I believe significant investments must be made in our city to maintain and improve the quality of life. I'd like to make sure that any of those investments are made with streamlining, consolidation, and reducing our overall building and maintenance footprint as a city be kept in mind. If said investments work toward those goals, they are worthwhile in my opinion and should garner bipartisan support. I do not support using one project as a way to prop up another. We must strive to maintain low fixed costs with any future investment because any competent person understands that the state aid we receive to supplement our municipal budget will continue to erode year after year. The state of the state is worse today than it was when I ran for council this term. I was very vocal in warning taxpayers of what would happen, and what I warned of is starting to play out. I just wish to heed extreme caution, but we're from Bristol, Connecticut, so we're up to the challenge. As a city, we have shown great fiscal restraint in a turbulent time, all while achieving, as well as maintaining, the best bond rating attainable. Our city holds an extremely high tax collection rate as well because we are made up of good, solid residents with a sense of pride that keep their word and pay their bills on time, and we are greatly fortunate for that. I am fully aware of the correlation between tax collection and the tax rate and how each of them correlate with one another. I am a firm believer in holding the line on taxes and thinking of the taxpayer with each and every decision that we make as a council. We should be proud of our accomplishments as a city, as a council, and as a people, regardless of political distractions on either side. With that being said, it is a time for investment, and we are poised to have the best rates available to us for such investments. These investments are not a dream, they are reality. We must remember that a AAA bond rating is not a blank check, merely a right to borrow at the best rates. We have many outdated buildings for city agencies that do not promote efficiency or good government. We need to improve our customer service to our residents, and improved facilities help in achieving that goal. We cannot fully control costs if we are operating in antiquated facilities or in antiquated fashion. Any business owner would tell you that. The long and short of it, we are wasting money day in, day out, year after year. We must use this point in time to make a down payment on our future as a city and as a people, but one that is sound in strategy and less in utopian sales pitch. I also want to make the public aware that no matter what the fate of Memorial Boulevard School is, something must be done at or with City Hall and with the school itself. I'll say it again. As a conservative, this is not really a want, but rather a true need. I view the city operations through a business owner's lens, and certain business decisions must be made whether they are appealing or not, easy or not. The current City Hall has completed its life cycle and investment is needed. Just like you would in your own home, your car, or the damn socks on your own feet, those will wear and need to be replaced someday. Different material object, same principle. I just respectfully request that the most responsible choice be chosen if I am unable to choose it. Lastly, I'm hoping that at least a vote of confidence in a proposal can happen before election time. Why, you ask? Well, people are fed up. They have elected us to do a job and to make a move. I fully support the due diligence period for any proposal, and I will fight for that any day of the week. But then there comes a time to act. I'm not looking forward to dealing with these issues as we get closer to November, as we need to move on to other important items such as continued economic development, getting our messages to businesses outside the city, creating leaner government, and moving our city ahead from all ends, residential and educational. And with that said, Your Honor, I respectfully recuse myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We did have a sign-up sheet, but no one signed up the sheet, so now we're going to go, no one signed up to speak, so we're going to go right to Eric.
Just for you.
Good evening, everyone. Eric Cushman with Gilbane Building Company. So, he's got a much better prepared speech than I do, so I'll give Mr. Donato that. So I'm here tonight following several conceptual estimates that we've done on behalf of the city with regards to the City Hall and Memorial Boulevard Theater project. So this really dates back to November for City Hall, and actually previously our involvement with the theater. So in November, we did a large study presented to you guys regarding the City Hall relocation, renovate this building, relocate it over to Memorial Boulevard. We came out with a brief update in March, a short form letter regarding a couple different options. And now tonight in June, a couple more options that we've looked at the city's request. So I prepared a short, very brief one-page summary handout, and I guess I'll talk about each option briefly. This corresponds to a letter that was also issued dated June 7th. And so we looked into three options, and I know it's slightly off the agenda, but if it's okay with the joint board, I'm just going to talk about all three. Make it a little bit easier for me to present, and then you guys can ask questions on both. So three options. The first one being the City Hall relocation renovation at Memorial Boulevard. The number there on the page is about $30.4 million. This was responded to and comes from our March letter following our November report and our meetings earlier in the year. That number represents moving City Hall over in the building, but also performing some of the ADA, life safety, building upgrades that would allow for a future fit-out of the theater, basically. So you're putting the bones in place, essentially, and not doing the architectural upgrades or doing the seating, but really putting the bones in place, fixing the ceiling, putting the restrooms in, putting the elevator in, making sure that you have access for the handicap, and dealing with some of the building code issues in the building on that side. It encompasses that following that estimate. The second one down is an updated estimate, which we had originally broken out, and I'm just summarizing here, as Phase 1 and Phase 2 for the theater. So as a part of this letter, we looked at building out the theater at a 500-seat capacity. So the story is basically have enough parking on site to handle about 500 seats. To go beyond 500 seats based on the zoning requirements, you need to build a parking lot somewhere else. We've included in this $13 million estimate basically a budget number to build on-grade parking at an adjacent lot. No acquisition costs or anything like that included, but there were some conversations about possibly a long-term lease on a site, and so that's what we figured is upgrading a lot with the additional spots required to get to that 800-seat theater. So that $13 million number gets broken out in part of our letter. It's combined for the purposes here to look at it. The idea was that you could bring online a 500-seat theater at about just like $12.3 million, and then it was another $900,000 to bring online the balance of the seating in case one would want to defer it and do that parking upgrade and lot expansion at a later date. The third option that we looked at was to construct both of them concurrently. You'll notice a little bit of a range there, $32 to $35 million. At this point, with everything being so conceptual, there's some duplications of scopes of work. There are some things that if you combine the two projects, you'll have some economies of scale, but plugging an exact number and a figure, it's a little bit of a hard thing to put a number at. And so we're saying high end, probably $35 million, low end, $32 million. All of this is based on the original concepts and designs, which we really discussed back in November. Full-blown renovation of the building, bringing it online, for another 50 years, effectively, is the way we looked at it. So with that said, I guess I'll open it up for any questions.
Any questions?
I have a question. How long do you anticipate that the project would take once it got the go-ahead?
Sure. So, probably another. there's two options, right? So just the theater or the city hall plus the theater. right?
Let's say it was number 3, where everything was packed in together.
So really at that point, you'd have to start the design process, which will take you a year and a half. You can get demolition and abatement going a little bit early if you wanted to, ultimately, because the building's sitting there empty. But say you did design for about a year, you're probably talking a year and a half in construction, give or take. And that's very rough.
Yeah.
Eric, if you go to schematic design, you see there's numbers remaining static, going down, up, because you're going to be drilling down on...
The goal ultimately, and John, you know it, is for us to set a budget at a level that we feel is appropriate, and then work with the design team to make sure we maintain or minimize that budget. Do I see a $32 million job becoming 15? No. Do I see us being able to work with the design team and certainly turn the screws on it a little bit? Absolutely. At this level, and you guys know, we have a very conceptual scope of work, basically, and construction cost estimating is really about what we're doing. And so here, we're looking at square foot costs, we're looking at historic data, and trying to plug an estimate and combining that with what we know with the building. So John, as you said, when we move along that process, we'll be able to, tighten up the look at it and everything else, but I don't see a significant decrease in cost.
And the additional parking, what did you carry for a space, do you remember?
I don't off the top of my head. We carried about $500,000 for the parking lot itself.
Yeah.
I agree up there.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Eric, the 32 to 35 million, that includes the abatement of the building, yes?
Correct. So that's a great point, actually. So in front of you, when we reflect costs, it's working with the Public Works Department as well to make sure we include all hard and soft costs. So we have everything from the architect, engineer, to abatement, to moving the city over. I will preface that with the fact that it's abatement for the path of construction in the building. When we looked at it with John's committee, there's a bunch of hazardous materials in the building that, just from a cost standpoint, you wouldn't necessarily leave. You don't take out, you can leave. You don't need to abate them, they can stay. It's really for worker safety. It's not going to be a school or anything like that in the future.
So you'd be encapsulating the remaining hazardous material. Do you see a breakdown of the encapsulation process, let's say in 25 years, where we are going to have to face those costs?
I'm not an expert in it. I got to tell you, I mean, with the stuff we're dealing with in the building, you're talking about some VCT, some plaster that's hot, and we're dealing with a lot of it as part of the estimate. I just wanted to preface it that we're not dealing with everything in getting a clean building. The techniques being used, we use on projects, it's what the environmental consultants tell us are going to last, and we do it all the time. So I don't see an issue, but it's not my expertise.
There's a lot of things you really don't have to touch.
Yeah.
Not even encapsulate, but there is probably 2 or 3% questionable asbestos in the plaster, because it's been there since 1917 or 1918. But the wood fiber tile that's above the present that you see, the glue, the black glue that holds them on, that has asbestos. But you don't have to touch that because it's sprinkled above that ceiling, so you can leave it. But when you start cutting holes in the walls, and there's some VAT on the floors in some of those classrooms still that have to come out, and I'm sure the glue that holds those down, unless you put carpet over it, and that solves that problem. But, come on.
Your wife, John.
Someone trying to sell me something from Stafford, Connecticut. You know anybody in Stafford? I'll refer the call to you.
Eric, thank you. I just want to clarify the, lack of a better term, the enhanced audiovisual and sound system, and I think you put it in the estimate of the 13.2 on the sheet.
Yes.
That is not included in here.
Correct.
However, if I add the $30,496 that you gave us in March and the additional $5,000,009, it is in that number.
So,
Is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm doing apples to apples.
so that's a great question. So, specific to the bigger project, when back in March and things like that, we had, let me do a little history. When we presented in November, we had done an estimate for the theater back in July. A lot of scope, kind of John referred to, had yet to be defined, and we're slowly moving forward with that project, learning more and more about it. So part of that project, the original estimate, the last one we did in July was about $12 million, which included $1.4 million for theater equipment and audiovisual. Moving forward, subsequent to that estimate, start working further and further along the design process, we learned that the proposed design that was currently in the documents and what the team was looking at would not be enough parking. And so basically the theater cost estimate at $12 million never reflected enough parking. So what we did as a part of this is, while you can add those numbers up and add some direction from the city, the theater cost itself increased by about $1 million. It's like we're $500,000 somewhere there. However, we pulled out the AV and equipment, which is one of those upgrades that you can make at any time, basically, for that project, or a third party can make through a fundraising effort or what have you. So we have the backbone for future equipment, things like that. You need supplemental steel, conduits, raceways, and the like as a part of a construction effort, but we don't have the equipment.
So it's not in any of these estimates at 1.4?
It's not.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear.
Yep.
Mr. Chair?
Good.
Originally, there was a phase 1, which included the first floor of the building. Does this now include that, or is it just the theater?
So when you're looking at the $13.2 million estimate, that brings online the main corridor, the restrooms, and brings mechanicals, basically stuffing them into the space for future tenant fit-out. That's the way the theater committee had looked at that. And if an entity wanted to rent out a space or what have you, they'd be able to essentially plug into mechanicals in there and not have to do some major fit-out themselves to do the work.
So is that just the first floor, or is it the whole second and third floor?
Correct, just the first floor.
And it was just stubbing in, so there's no other rooms that are taken care of, it's just a stub in the hallway?
So if you can imagine walking down that main hall on the first floor, obviously we have to make modifications for ADA to get you into the building. So you're doing some entrance modifications, you're upgrading the restrooms, you're upgrading the corridor itself, and then the classrooms themselves would basically sit as they are today, but be ready for future fit-out. Have mechanicals that are upgraded, state-of-the-art there and ready to expand upon, lighting.
So that's totally changed from what phase 1 was, from what the people came up with. That's totally
No,
changed.
what the building committee, what MBS building committee came out of their development with is what the 13.2 is.
Okay, so there'll be a list that you'll be able to provide us of the other. In other words, I want to be able to compare apples to apples, so that you're doing exactly the same thing that you said you were going to do for phase 1. You'll be able to do that for us. In other words, we'll take the people that did the drawings, etc., came up with a scheme, listed what was in phase 1. We'll be able to compare that to what we have and what we're going to get, and they should be comparable, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So it should be fine. And so if that's the situation, if that's phase 1, as to what the building committee came up with, then that should take care of that. Okay.
That's
Now, John?
through the chair. That's different. The phase 1 for the theater in the phase 1 project is different than if City Hall were to move there, because the first floor under phase 1 is what you see now with some ductwork in the ceiling, etc. When you start to do something with City Hall there, you've got to change all those rooms, and that's not in phase 1. That's a whole different animal.
If you look at the City Hall option, they are the tenant of the building. With NBCC's option in that project, they have a little space allocated on the first floor that they're using for green room, things like that, and then preparing that floor for future expansion. And so I believe we're aligned on that piece of the phase, but as John alluded to, if the projects get combined, there's a little programming that needs to be done to figure out where we can put the parts and the pieces that will slightly change the plan. There's space for it.
So just going to, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I think Councilman Mills is just talking about the second option here on your sheet, the $13 million. We're just trying to, because we've had lots of different iterations of that, and so we're just trying to, I guess, establish what's included in that.
I'd like to add one more thing, if I could. I know it's not on here, but The other thing that you talked about the last time we were here was this building. And I believe you came up with an estimate of $20 to $21 million to renovate this building, correct? I was reading through, and I know that that's the figures. It was
Yeah,
$20,936,000 through $20,936,285, correct?
Yeah, and that was from the May or March letter?
Right. And again, I just want to go back, if I could, and just give the reason why City Hall was even considered to move, was that figure, okay? In other words, there was no idea, the first concept was just to have the theater and to have a cultural center. When it came to find out how much it was going to cost or how much money we were going to spend at City Hall, the thought was, do we take that money and spend it on City Hall, or we take that money and spend it on the boulevard? Okay, that's how the whole concept of moving City Hall. Because I know in the past there was a statement made at the last meeting that the last two administrations this came up, et cetera, and we decided not to move City Hall. The reason again was that we did not know that there was going to be, it was going to cost $20 million to renovate this building. This building really never came into play. Okay, so now that this building is into play, and I assume that it is into play, all right, our choice is going to be, do we want to renovate this and just do the theater at the boulevard, or do we want to move City Hall and do the same? Now, obviously, if you stay here and just renovate the theater, all right, you're going to be spending the same amount of money. You're going to be spending $20 million here or $21 million here for this building, $12 million or $12.6 for our $13.6 for that building, so it's about $34 to $35 million. But then what do you do with the rest of the building? I think that's the thing that has to be determined, what happens to the rest of the building and who pays for that. Now again, in the original proposal, it was, okay, the committee that was formed, that was going to be a fundraising committee, was going to come up and they were going to be responsible for the building. Well, right now, if we're talking about not moving City Hall there, or if we're moving City Hall to another location, that situation still has to be concerned, or is a concern. Obviously, we'll have the theater, which everybody wants, but then we'll have a building that's empty, or is going to have a cultural center, and who is going to pay for the cultural center? If that means that this committee now has to raise $15 to $20 million, it's very, very difficult. Obviously, we're talking about them raising 1.6 or 1.4 for the lights and the other things that we're talking about, which is doable. But to raise $14 to $20 million so that they take care of the rest of the building, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I just want to be sure that everybody understands that this building still has to come into play. If we're going to renovate this, we're talking about $21 million, plus the theater, which is the same price. If we're staying here and spending the money here and building the theater, it's the same amount of money, but we don't have the rest of the Memorial Boulevard taken care of, and who is going to be responsible for that? I think those are the questions that has to be asked. I think you've done a great job here, obviously putting the whole thing together and seeing that it's going to be $32 to $35 million, and that'll give us City Hall there, and it'll give us the theater, and then this building will have to be sold, etc. Okay? So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was clear with those options and knew exactly what we have, what we're faced with. Thank you.
I have another question. When you're talking about number 3, constructing both, will it still look like a school, or will there be significant construction so it would look more like a City Hall, like carpet and everything down?
Sure. Outside would look relatively the same, some parking lot upgrades, sidewalks, things like that. The sound would look familiar. The inside of the building, that $30 to $32 million is a pretty major renovation and reconfiguration. Keeping structural bearing walls in place and things like that, but where you can open it the floor plan a little bit. We studied that with the Public Works Department.
And the constructing the both, will it still include the green rooms for the theater if City Hall is in the building?
I don't see why not. Like I referred to before, I think it's just a programming effort with an architect and a design team that'll happen as you figure it out, but the costs are covered wherever that would go.
Through the chair, so basically the majority of the first floor goes into a City Hall type municipal building. I want to talk about the sub-level just to make sure that my mind wraps around that again. Nothing was happening to the gym area or the pool area. that would require, none of those, and the rooms down by the lunchrooms and everything, those are not developed in this price at all, correct?
Correct, yeah. Ray Walter will describe a little bit on you, but there's several layers like a raised ranch over there basically, and so you have about 15,000 square feet that we call the basement, the sub-basement, that are not being utilized for City Hall, that will have, again, like life safety upgrades, fire alarm devices, things like that, but aren't being fit out. City Hall will take about 60, in this concept, 60,000 square feet of the building, which are really those main 4 floors of classroom space that you can walk up on. Not the gym and the pool.
Right, but basically they'll be accessible and people can use them because they have the life safety code in there. So, for example, if you had a band that had to stage before they went upstairs or something, or they could use that area.
Ray's coming up.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to make that promise publicly because I'm not an architect or a code expert, and I think that would require further study, but certainly the space would be in the building in order to be the appropriate upgrades. I just don't know from an assembly standpoint, will there be enough there to have a full band practicing and rehearsing based on today's code, which we'd have to talk
Or a
about.
staging area or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, just to kind of clarify that matter, because the building is kind of set up with a raised range, so we walk in, the area which we call the main floor, in our report we called it like the primary floor, the floor that the theater green room would be on. That is, would have like we're looking at the city clerk, the same departments in here, but we are using the floor immediately below that. There's still, and we would modify the grade so there would actually be a doorway ADA entrance, but there's actually a floor below that, which is, the gym. So we're not using like the level of the gym, like where the basketball court is, but we're using the level below the green room,
Like
where the woodworking shop is.
Where the shops were in the cafeteria and so forth.
Yeah, so we are using the cafeteria and the woodworking shop
As City Hall
as City Hall.
offices and so forth.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You have something?
I did, you had mentioned this June 7th letter. Do we have a copy of that? Is that something that's been provided to us? Because
I believe that was sent out to everyone.
I'm not positive. I recently distributed to the staff here, so if you didn't receive that, it's really me as we tweet the final number, so I'm sure this and...
Okay, because I don't recall seeing that, so.
This is March.
Basically, there's a November report that's the thick one, there's a
Right.
March letter, and
Yep.
then now recently a June letter which supports stuff.
Anything else?
Just to adult, what was included in that June letter?
So to me, pertaining to Memorial Boulevard theater project, it was looking at the 2 options after the 2 earlier. So it was building out the theater as a 500-seat theater without the interior equipment at $12.3 million, and then doing a second phase to add the balance of the seats, another 250, 300 seats, and parking to get it to that 750 number, but also having to go upgrade a parking lot basically, which was the second phase at $920,000. And then the third option we showed on here was the $32 to $35 million combined facility, basically.
Charles, does this include painting? Painting the theater? I only ask that because obviously the ceiling, we got construction costs for putting up scaffolding. I believe it was, what, John, $60,000, $55,000 to $60,000 just to put scaffolding up?
Yes.
And obviously, if they're going to do that to repair the ceiling, I would assume that they would paint the ceiling at the same time.
Exactly, yeah. And so then from the November report to the March letter was one of the things we looked at going into that scope of work. It's including the theater numbers, it's also included the City Hall numbers you go into the building as part of safety upgrades.
I believe it included fixing the ceiling because we had to fix the ceiling.
Right, but is it going to include painting it while you're
It came
there?
halfway down when the scaffolding was up. Frank, do you remember out of your committee?
It was to include painting the entire theater.
Yeah. Painting the entire, what do you think?
From the chair.
We'll confirm that. We'll confirm that, David.
I'm sorry?
We'll confirm that just to make sure. To the chair.
To the chair, to Dr. Dave.
Thank you, John. Mayor, can I ask Frank Stosky a question if you can approach? Mr. Stosky, would you mind? Good evening, Frank.
Frank, as we go through this, and we go back to our source documents for both, from March, as well as some of the more detailed information we have, do you have a mastery of what we're talking about here tonight? If we, as part of the joint board, need a local resource for answering questions, do you understand the differences that exist that we're talking about tonight, kind of piecemeal?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, what's in, what's out, we do the comparisons?
Well, the building committee has a special meeting scheduled for tomorrow.
Right.
And the reason for that meeting is our previous meeting, there was the same kind of back and forth. It's been so long since the committee voted on what we wanted to move ahead with that we need to refresh everyone's memory. So the architect will be there with the drawings that were completed, and we're going to go through this in detail. So there's no misunderstandings or miscommunications as to what Phase 1 will consist of.
So you'll be able to parse each individual component in your meeting, and we can ask you questions?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. In fact, hopefully it'll be all detailed in a minute.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Mayor.
Questions?
Jeff?
I don't think that you, Eric, it's either Walter or Ray, but the 500-seat theater, which is a problem that was most of the discussion at the last building committee meeting, but 500-seat theater and City Hall, is there enough existing parking on site to accommodate both, or is additional parking can still the elephant in the room with those two entities?
Based on current zoning, we feel that a 500-seat theater in City Hall would not require additional parking as long as there's not concurrent use of both facilities.
Okay.
That the regulations would, that there's the waivers in there that allow.
But anything in addition to 500 seats in the theater trigger additional parking?
It triggers some means of additional parking
Right.
or adjustment in the regulations, yes.
Okay. But some means is an important aspect, which hopefully we're beginning to deal with. Thanks, Paul.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
since we have the retired controller back on vacation, back on retirement, can we ask him?
That's coming up on number...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Number 4.
I didn't want to get too comfortable back there. And I was probably relaxing from the day's efforts.
It's just like you did at the council meeting. Minus the magazine.
Through the chair, I'm not sure where we are in the agenda, because I know
I think we kind of incorporated one.
Eric has incorporated, yes, items 1 through 3. I'm just wondering, I expected there to be some discussion of the possibility of renovating City Hall, and I'm just questioning why that's been removed from the agenda.
Because the motion was made to discuss the City Hall moving over to MBS at the council meeting.
Okay, I just thought this was, in other words, if people weren't happy with that, the other option is
We can discuss it.
renovate. Okay,
They've
no, I
already
just...
discussed it. They've already talked about it. They've already talked about it.
Correct, no, he mentioned it. I'm just wondering if it is something that I guess the whole board should be discussing.
I could put on the next one board if you like. Okay, next week, Wednesday, I believe.
That's fine. Again, I was just questioning the thought process
We'll
of...
put that on the next joint board. Any other discussion before we have the money people come up? I asked Glenn Quacko and Diane Waldron, our new comptroller. This is her first official meeting, I believe.
This is familiar path.
back, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you.
How was your trip?
It's been a fabulous 2 days. The mayor has asked me here to talk about financing of the projects in light, and I know that Diane has prepared I saw in brief memo on some aspects, so I'm not going to cover what she's talking about. But basically, at the time, Mayor, you asked me to look at the financing for $13 million for just the theater, and the estimate was higher for the combined at 40. This I'm hearing 32 to 35, but in meetings that I had with you, you asked me to find out on 40. I asked Matt Spurndle, who's our financial advisor when we're issuing debt, to prepare schedules, and I have those here, and I'll talk about them. You won't have to sit and read them, but I'm going to give them so they can be passed out later. I want to put the debt issuance in context, okay? We just issued $24 million of debt. We had $50 million approximately authorized and issued. That now brings us to about $75 million. We also have about $7 million in notes, so now we're over $80 million long-term and short-term. One of the problems I have with this is that looking at the $40 million, the $13 million in my estimation is very doable as far as our debt structure is concerned, but $40 million is getting high, quite frankly. And you're going to add, if you add $40 million to approximately $80 million, obviously you'll be the first time over $100 million. That's going to be questioned on many levels by rating agencies, because that's not what we said to them when we did the presentation a month or so ago. We were talking about the seed money, the $5 million they were aware of, but we did say to them that the final solution is not known. Couple issues to be thinking about in the larger picture. Is this project going to leapfrog all the other projects that you have in line in the 10-year capital improvement program? I think you need to not just look at this project on its own. You need to look at it in context of the 10-year plan, because you've been issuing $7 to $10 million a year. We were going to issue debt next year, if you recall, another 20 to 25 million of outstanding. So that has to occur. We really need to get that off the books. It's a timing issue. And it's very important. Robin understands, as far as we've dealt with our bond counsel, is we can't have debt on the books and not issued too long. It becomes taxable. So we've got another 20 to 25 million that we have to issue. And if you issue $40 million on that, you're going to be approaching $125 million of outstanding debt. I'm not so certain that you want to go there, okay? That is a lot. And you're approaching doubling your debt in 2.5 years. Part of the problem is also that the interest rates are rising. We had the Fed increase the rates, so that's going to be a little bit of an issue. I think Diane will have to, obviously, whatever your decision is, have to contact Matt Spurndle once again and get an update on these numbers that you're going to be able to look at. But the $13 million becomes $17 million with interest. Okay. Again, using 40, because that's what I was told. I see the numbers a little bit lower, but the 40 million becomes 57 million with interest. The 13 million is probably 0.20 mils, easily to manage and handle. But when you get into the 35 to 40 million, and now you're going to be issuing principal and interest at a tune of $2.8 million per year. That's probably what, around $750,000, if not a little bit more. So I'd be concerned, that's just for this project. Again, not thinking about the 25 million that we had scheduled to issue next year. Okay, so that's a key. There's also some taxable notes that need to be issued next year. I forget what the number, $3 or $4 million. So, and that's not even thinking about the 40 million. So I would really question. I don't know if it has to be done, so soon. If it was my decision, and it isn't, but I would proceed with the theater portion. I think there's a consensus among officials and committee members that there is a definite need to do that, and it's affordable. But I think if you're doing the $40 million, I think you should maybe possibly think about doing the theater first. Allow some time to go by. You're here. We've been managing for so many years here, and it's not a major problem. But I think you need to let time go by so we can issue that 25 million we had planned. Okay, let some debt service fall off at $7 to $8 million a year, so that debt service drops down. And a couple, 3 years from now, if you make a decision that you do want to switch City Hall over here, you've now paid off probably $22, $23 million, and $40 million would be more manageable. But to do 40 million now, on top of the 25 million we had planned, plus 3 or 4 in taxable notes, that becomes expensive in the mill rate.
Through the chair, are you accept questions now?
Oh, of course.
Okay, 2 questions, please. One is, you said what's the average life of our current debt? It amortizes down at $7 million a year, about?
About, what do you think, about 7?
I thought it was more than that.
What did you say, Robert?
6.8.
So about 7 in principle.
Yeah, principal. Our debt clear was $8.8 million, but a lot of it is
It's the principle that we really want to talk
so that
about.
number was with interest, primarily. So, okay. Second question, please. Now, how do we factor in as a committee how we deal with the alternative of staying here and paying for the build-up, the $20 million for this building? How do we factor that in, and how we pay for that?
Well, obviously, in my mind, the short answer is half of the 40, right? So
No, but then we would bond
you
it
do
out.
the 13 and you do the 20, as Dave pointed out earlier, right? I still think it's going to be a little pricey. I think you just have to wait. I think you've got to do this in phases. If I was advising you, and I am, I think you go ahead with the theater. I think that's very doable in the short run. It's a doable number. Our debt percentages are low, but if you add that $40 million, 35 to 40, you're getting out of hand. Keep on going back to, we got the 25 million that we're supposed to issue, and then we've got some taxable notes that we have to get off the books and issue those, and to put 40 million on top of that, that's $65 million. That's not doable.
I wasn't clear. I'm sorry, I don't think it was clear. As I remember, the planning horizon for the build-out of this building was almost immediate or within 3 years, right? I mean, we weren't going to do this in stages at 20 million, were we? I thought the planning horizon was short term. I'm just looking for clarification.
Sure. I think Walter would be best to answer that.
Well, you want to speak to this building?
When we talked about City Hall, we had talked about either doing an all-at-once project that was, or breaking it up into several phases and doing sections of systems and of areas over a number of years. As we said, because you're doing some rework, that increases the cost, but it also allows you to spread that over a longer period. But we didn't identify whether it be 3 years or 4 years or 10 years.
Before we go on to questions, Diane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Sure. I did run a couple of quick numbers, and actually Glenn kind of confirmed them. And actually, he looked at my notes, so he kind of took them.
Glenn!
Just a couple of things that I wanted to point out that I, just in looking at this, and granted, I've had like a day and a half to really look at the numbers and whatnot. But Glenn is accurate. $40 million on top of what the city currently has is a lot for the city to absorb. Just adding it into the current levels of debt based on, I think Glenn is passing out or will have passed out what the financial advisor put together. So I'm using that structure. You're looking at probably a 0.88 mil increase in 2019 and an additional 0.64 if, again, everything was done all at the same time. I think Glenn is right. I think it does need to be phased in no matter how you do it, but adding 40 million is a lot to add to the debt burden of the city. Just a couple of other things to add on as well. I mean, there are some rising pension costs I think you had to deal with this past year with the budget. And again, it was mentioned, just think about your additional 10-year CIP program. How will all of that fit in if you add this $40 million? So again, something that can be phased in, but all of these factors need to be looked at. And just one other thing, I did a couple of other quick ratios comparing them to when the city did the bond issue last month. If everything was issued in accordance with that schedule, all of your debt ratios would double. And I think that's something that you don't want to look at right now. So, do you want to add anything else to that?
That's a good, very good point. The ratios, they're going to be doubled like that. You're going to lose your flexibility to issue new debt if you go for this 40 million on top of the 25 that we had already previously planned. You're going to lose a lot of flexibility in issuing debt if something really, see, in my mind, everything I've heard about this project, it's something we'd like to do, but it's not something you have to do. And I think because you can wait in this building. You've been here for years, and I've been here 20 years. It's suffice. It's not current, up to date, of course. But I think when your ratios start to double, I would expect Diane will get what's called a surveillance call, and they'll want to know, give us the new numbers, what's going on, what changed. Why did this project leapfrog over the existing 10-year plan that you gave us? And we did. We issued the budget document to them, to all 3 rating agencies. So the bottom line is this, when you're considering this project, 13, I would suggest go ahead with it. If you're looking at the 40 million, I think you need to have a meeting where you have in front of you the 10-year plan. To look at that, where does this fit in? Does this leapfrog, and what's the effect of deferring and pushing some of those projects $5 to $10 million that were scheduled for next year? So you need to look at that and say, okay, no, we want this to leapfrog at 40 million, whatever the case, but however you decide, or no, it's not going to be doable because Diane's going to be able to give you some updated information on a spreadsheet like she has here and says, here's how the 40 plus the 25 plus the 4 or 5 million in notes. Here's what she just pointed out, your debt service is going to go up by, and do you think the community can afford it? When normally, by the way, when your debt service goes as high as this could happen with the 40 million plus the 25, usually your collection rate drops because the taxes go like that and people just cannot afford it. And once again, you're contemplating this, don't forget, in the second year of a very, very bad year with the state of Connecticut. So I would predict probably, you lost $7 million in ECS money. That's still not resolved yet, and you're probably going to lose more grants next year, both on the city and the education side. So the deficit at the state level hasn't been resolved. That's why I would think, given that scenario, I would think that you would delay, if you're moving City Hall to Memorial Boulevard, it doesn't have to happen overnight. At a minimum, you can have a year of discussion to figure out all those concepts I talked about, the 40, the 25, the notes. Figure out what your 3 to 5 year plan is going to be in additional debt. Walter is usually coming up with road projects that are a necessity in this community. So you've got to turn around, and when you have your capital committee, you can't be looking at 7 to 10 million like we've been doing for the last 3-4 years. You've got to be looking at 3 to 5.
Quick question?
Yes, go.
The 40 million makes me nervous because it's not 40 million, but that's the number you've been working with. But let's suppose that both projects go.
What do you mean by both projects?
City Hall and
Okay.
Theater happen at the same time.
Okay.
2 years from now, we'd start construction.
Mhm.
So you'd issue debt 3, 4, 5 years from now?
No, well, you've got to have some...
You could do some short-term borrowing.
Yeah, you've got to do some short-term note borrowing.
But you'd be selling bonds.
Probably 3 years. Yeah, once the construction starts, you're going to be probably, $750,000 a month, most
Yeah.
likely. So your liquidity here is going to drop pretty fast.
Okay, but it's not next year.
No, it's not next
We should
year.
understand, it's not
That's
next
right.
year, it's not the year after.
Right. But I'm also concerned about that 10-year plan.
Oh, no, and I agree with you, Glenn. The other thing I think, and Dave hit on it,
As well.
I think all of us would find beneficial to have the debt retirement, so that we could all look at it and say, so much comes off next year, so much come off the year
That's
after that,
right.
so we had some hard numbers to look at.
And that's something that our financial advisor Diane can make the phone call and have it happen. Where are we today? Okay, we're about approximately 75 million in debt. We were 50, we issued about 25, so you're 75. And where would we be 2 years from now when you issue notes, and then 3 years when you go into a long-term bond, and now you've got 3 years of 10-year capital improvements also. So you need to work 2 years, and what do you anticipate 3 years from now? Put that into a spreadsheet. What is the individual cost by year?
It's like, we've always seen that, we try to keep that debt service at a certain level, so.
That'll be the best financial solution and decision maker for you to see what those costs are.
Thank you.
You got it.
Glenn, your explanation was excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But something that concerns me is that if we stretch this out, let's say we start with the theater. Now we're going to have to keep this building resuscitated if the plan is eventually to move everything over there. How many millions will we have to sink in for the next 4 or 5 years to keep this building going? I mean, are we going to be... If we stretch this thing out, are we going to eventually be tossing $10 million down the hole, only to sell this?
Yeah, it goes up at the wall. But, I've been here, for 19, 20 years with you, and I see the renovations, I see modifications and updates, like we did the ceiling and different things. Of course, several years ago, you had the boiler problem and all that. But I don't know, I don't want to speak for Walter, but what I've seen and observed in implementing budgets for the last several years is the costs haven't been in the millions. I don't really foresee that.
Well, the reason I'm asking that is because the upgrade that we're talking about on the table for the present City Hall is in the $20 million range. Now, the question is, contained in that $20 million range, are there some infrastructure projects that are necessities to keep this thing moving along for the next 5 years or 6 years?
I think Walter mentioned that. I would, talking about phase versus doing it at one time. I think when the discussions that I was in when Walter was mentioning that is it would seem to be going towards a phase. So you're doing one part of the building, you still have 2/3 of the employees still working and taking those employees that have to be placed somewhere else, add 3 employees to the controllers, add a couple to here, there, blah, blah, blah. So I think the phasing would probably be the best way to go, in my view, what I've seen in the meetings that we talked about.
I would rather not spend any money here that's unnecessary.
I agree.
Especially if we know that that's the end game.
Right.
I mean, to me, are we going to get our dollars back if we decide to put this thing on the market in 7 years and we just sunk $5 million into it?
It's another good point for that spreadsheet is if you get to talk about the selling and the value of this building, because that could be applied to the debt service, lowering your mill rate. So that's another good layer on that. There's something that I heard, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I want to bring it up, Mayor, is we're just talking all or nothing. It seems like all or nothing off of Memorial Boulevard. What about 10 Main Street? Is that...
That's another, I'm going to be talking about that on next Wednesday.
Yeah, see, I mean, that's the other option is, turning around and putting it into City Hall into 10 Main Street and it's a modernized building from what I've been there on several meetings when it was open.
Well, one other thing that we didn't talk about at all, and I know there's been floating discussion about the Board of Ed moving over there too.
Right.
That's going to be all part of next week's presentation.
Okay, all right, because if that was the case, then now we have two large buildings.
So that fits into this discussion also. What you're going to do next week is another layer. I mean, we're talking Memorial Boulevard, but then you're talking a swap or a possible lease, which would be less than issuing debt. So there's some good options there for you.
Well, the other option for debt, although I know we looked at it, I'm sorry, Mayor, is go back to NDC and let them issue the bid, and we pay rent.
We looked at that, that was more expensive than...
Yeah, it would turn out to be more expensive.
I know it was because it was 30 years rather than, we're talking about 17, but I don't know if we ever ratcheted down with them and say, we don't want to do it over 30 years.
I had Matt Skirndl have a conversation with that gentleman that came here, and he went to his higher-ups to take his notes and say, what do you think? And it was more expensive.
Well, I know it's more expensive.
Yeah, but probably not what we want to do. We lose control. And the big thing in the meetings back then was the loss of control. And having to put, from I recall, a sinking fund together for future. That was a problem there because it was going to be another $500,000.
Oh, I know.
You remember that, yeah. So there is what you're talking about, putting a sinking fund away of $500,000 at the city's expense for something that is not going to be totally predictable. So that was the reasons why that $500,000 was really putting everything way out of whack. So I think that probably is not the best consideration unless you want to bring it up again. But
no, I just
yeah, probably not.
The fact that we have options is.
Yeah. Well, your options now are the 13, the 40, and what you're going to talk about next week. I think is very important. Whether you're going to swap, lease, whatever the case may be. That looks like it could be a lot less costly than looking at a $40 million renovation of an old school.
Mr. Chair, Diane, this is more a Diane question. Do you think in the next week before the 28th meeting, you could circulate to the joint board the list of potential projects that have been identified both by Walt's group and the Board of Ed and so forth that are just hovering out in the next, I think we go out 10 to 15 years, just to give everybody a viewpoint of some of the things that are coming up on the horizon, just to have that, knowledge behind you.
Absolutely.
The 3 to 5 would be the most important.
Yeah.
That's the time frame we're talking about.
Right, but at least everybody has an idea of the scope that's coming down the pike. Granted, some of the things, once the Board of Ed finishes their evaluation of buildings that they started that study, that'll change some things for the schools, but I think everybody needs to grasp, how robust that list is.
To the chair, we have that available because
Right.
the 10-year capital planning committee approved the most recent version that I think.
Right, I think that's on the website.
Right, so I just want to make sure everybody takes a look at it, so.
Through the chair also, I appreciate your information, Diane, also. I know you're trying to make it as simple as possible, which is great. I think the thing that has to be brought into mind is not an either-or situation. Okay, that's critical, because if we're going into the boulevard to build out the theater, there are still the rest of the building to contend with. And what do we do with the rest of the building? I think that has to be brought up, and that has to be determined, because there is going to be a cost. And are we saying that, well, the committee that was put in place is going to raise the money, and they're going to decide what happens to the rest of the building? I just want to put that out there, because that is something that is going to be hanging over our decisions, and I think it's critical that we keep that in mind.
Any other discussion, questions?
Go ahead.
I just want to agree with that, because what we're looking at is we put $13 million into a theater with anything else, and what if it fails? Then what do we tell the taxpayers? How does that $13 million come back to the city because we're not going to sell that facility for that. But
Not only that, what do we do? Who takes care of the rest of the building while the theater's open?
Through
How
the
much
chair.
does that cost?
Sorry. Through the chair, I had a question for Walter, so I think so. Someone else brings you up again. So.
Thank you.
Walter, there were a couple questions when the finance folks were up here about this building. And my concern is that one of the reasons that propelled this conversation of possibly moving City Hall to Memorial Boulevard was the fact that this building does need an extensive amount of work. And my understanding is also that some of it is some life safety issues with all the problems with the air quality that we've had in the last couple of years. And I know that they've been resolved for the moment, but I also understand that there's rooms in the building that don't have air conditioning and, or aren't using all the systems because it's still not safe to use them all. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but doesn't some of that have to be addressed sooner than 3 to 5 years from now?
Yes, the only project that has to be addressed in the near-term future, or actually there's two projects, one is doing the abatement of the old pistol range, which there's funding for that in this year's budget.
I understand.
The other project that we need to move forward with is the replacement of the perimeter units, and that's estimated at a $2.5 million project. So that's the one project that we really need to move forward, but that's again because it's the HVAC system and it's on the exterior. That is an investment in the building that you're really going to recoup with any future, whether it be with the city or someone else.
But what if someone wanted to tear down the building and start over?
Well,
I mean, I'm asking. I'm asking a serious question.
No,
I guess
this will be a very tough building to market for another purpose because of the type of construction and the corridors. But even at that, I think economically it would be very tough to make the decision to do a tear down and start over. I mean, because then you're looking at a very, very large cost.
Okay, I guess I'm just looking for as much information as we can have. I guess my question would be, if we decided this month that we wanted to move City Hall to Memorial Boulevard. I'm not saying we're deciding that. I'm just saying if we decided that that's the way we wanted to go, would we be doing the HVAC for $2.5 million anyway?
We'd be looking at the schedule, but most likely we'd be doing at least a portion of that in some office areas. So we would do at least a portion of that project.
Okay. I think that's what we're trying to get at, and I think it kind of goes back to Mr. Lamont's question. Are we putting money in here that we're never really actually going to use if we weren't staying? You know what I mean? And we're just trying to get a sense of what that number is or what the amounts of those projects are.
Yes, I mean, we've kind of held on some maintenance projects that we have funded that if a decision is made, we will either move forward with those quickly or depending on the time frame. There's some things we're going to have to do because we're going to be here for most likely 3 more years.
Even if we were moving. Right. Okay. I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? Motion to adjourn. Well, before we do that, we're going to be having another meeting. It's not posted yet. It's going to be a joint board meeting June 28th at 5:30, did we say? 5:30. And then immediately following that will be a city council meeting. So look for the agenda on that. That should be posted the next day or two, or a few days. Motion to adjourn.
Move it.
Motion made, second. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion passes. Good evening.